What's up, everybody? Welcome to Phlox'em and episode 3 of our timing chart series. This episode, we're looking at step 2 of the timing chart, which is our choose a house step. Mechanically, this step is very simple. You're essentially making two choices. What's really important about this step is this is essentially where you should be doing all of the planning for your turn, because in order to make the right house choice, you kind of have to have a strategy for what you're going to be doing on your turn and understand what's going to happen. And I think that's very difficult for new players because you just don't have the experience to know exactly what's going to happen. You don't necessarily have the experience to know you should do this over this. And so it's very easy, I think, to get kind of stuck on this choice, trying to think through too many options, trying to read all the cards at once and really get a grasp on where the game is at, where really just playing cards, seeing things, seeing how they interact and unfold is going to be much better for you to learn and experience the game than really trying to work it out, at least in your first couple games. So we're going to talk through some tips, just how to get you playing cards faster, a couple high level things to look at to make sure you're not making really the wrong choice. And then we'll get into archives and a little bit of what that looks like. So let's look at this step and then we'll get into some examples. Step 2 of our timing chart is the choose a house step. Houses in Keyforge fill several different roles. One, they are how the cards are designed in a lot of ways in a specific house, and that house has a lot of themes, a lot of mechanics that they lean into, even a lot of strengths and weaknesses as far as gameplay and how they kind of function in the game. There's also a lot of the artistic theming of steely elves or like the angelic sanctum or whatever. It's really a lot of the identity of Keyforge is in these houses. Every deck in Keyforge is made up of 3 houses. Each set has 7 different houses to choose from when it's kind of generating a deck. Those 3 houses each make up 1 exact third of your deck total. So in this phase, in step 2, what we're doing is choosing 1/3 of our deck to be active on any given turn, meaning the other 2/3 are not available to us to use or play or anything like that. And so once you choose a house for the turn, you may only play, use, or discard cards of that house unless a card effect says otherwise. Flip that on the other side. Once you choose a house, you may not play, use, or discard cards of the other 2 houses unless a card effect says otherwise. Doesn't matter if it's on the board, in your hand, whatever. You may only use cards of the active house for your turn. The substeps of the choose a house phase are going to be pretty simple. The first one is doing what we just said. You're choosing a house. Every Archon card is going to have 3 houses on it. You can use that as your reference, especially as a new player, to know the names of these and stuff. But for your turn, you look down at that card and say, I choose X house to be my active house, and then you go on from there. There are going to be times where you actually have fewer choices or you are forced into a choice by cards like Control the Weak. And there are going to be rare instances where you actually have a 4th or even 5th option based on the current board state. Most of the time, though, all you need to do is look at your Archon card, choose one of those 3 houses, and you're good to go. Substep 2 is going to be very similar to what we've already looked at with start of turn effects and after you forge a key effects. They're basically passive effects that are often going to be found on things like artifacts. This one specifically, there are very few of, and most of them are not super impactful. But we are going to take a look at that and actually tie it into substep 3, which is picking your archives. Archives are a very strong mechanic in the game. They're not super difficult to understand, but there is a little bit of mechanics that we'll look at in our second example to just kind of go through both of those substeps together. But let's get into substep 1 and our example for that and just kind of talk through some quick little mechanics and just things to look at as a new player to help you get into your turn faster and get really past this step. So we've got our first example set up here. Very, very simple. We're just going to go over kind of what you're considering for choosing a house and what that looks like. So we've got our Archon card here. This is what we were talking about to begin with. We've got 3 different houses on here. We have Mars, Brobnar, and Dis. Let's take a look at the hand. Let's take a look at the board and just see kind of what that looks like. So right now I have 2 Brobnar creatures, 1 Dis creature, and 1 Mars creature on the board. I have 1 Dis artifact. On my hand, I have kind of a mix of stuff, right? I've got a couple Dis cards, I've got a lot of Brobnar cards, and then I have 1 Mars card. So right now you can see if I choose any 3 of those houses, I have things to do. I can use this creature and play this 1 Mars action. I can use both of these Brobnar creatures, or I can get some extra stuff out of hand. really, there's a lot of options, and oftentimes you're going to find out that a lot of houses may be able to do more than one thing on your turn. They're not always going to be very, very focused on what they're trying to do. Very difficult to know which is actually the correct one to choose for the turn. A long-standing guide for that. This is not a hard and fast rule, and it definitely kind of loses credibility the more you get into really high level play. There's a lot more decisions that go into this. But as a new player, when looking at your hand and board, one of the easiest things to do that is usually going to be not always your best play, but a pretty good play, is to just count up everything you have for each house between your hand and board and do whichever one is the most. So in this case, for Brobnar, I have 2 creatures on board and then 3 more cards in hand. So that's 5 cards total compared to Dis, which I have just 2 things on board and 2 in hand. So that's 4. And then Mars, I only have 1 creature and 1 card. It's 2. So Brobnar, I can play and or use 5 cards on my turn. So that's the turn I'm going to take. You'll see if I do that, just with no other examples here, I'm going to get some Amber Pips from playing these cards. I can reap or fight with these creatures, and then I'm going to get another creature on the board. It's a fine turn. It's, going to be advancing my hand because I get to draw back up to 6 at the end of my turn, and it's going to let me start getting Amber as well, which again is the goal of the game. What's tough with that is looking at your opponent's board. You're going to have to be looking at things of, are they at check? Do I need to answer their Amber amount? Do they have scary creatures that I need to deal with? And again, creature-wise, board state, just might not know as a new player if it's something you need to deal with. So I really encourage you to just ask your opponent. If you were me, what would you be fighting first on my board? What would you be getting rid of? What would you be afraid of? Because there's so many creatures in this game. There's so much to memorize. You're not going to have it all in your head to begin with, and you're not going to know how those cards combo. So a creature on its own might not look super scary. But if we take a look at Bellowing Patricide here, it says, while it's ready, every creature that enters play gains 1 damage. If you have certain cards that combo with your opponent having damaged creatures, this guy becomes a lot stronger. And so I see that on my opponent's side, and I have a lot of cards that are going to come down and get damaged, and I'm worried about the other cards they have in their deck, I might really prioritize removing that on my turn, even if it means I'm not doing as much else on the turn. Likewise, if my opponent is at check for a key, I might really prioritize using Dis so that I can tax them with the Slash of Broken Dreams. Basically, that says keys cost +3 during your opponent's next turn. If they only have 6 Amber, this makes their key cost 9, so they wouldn't be able to forge. Sometimes you have to do that, even if it's using or playing less cards on your turn, just to stop your opponent from forging. You'll notice in that example, we left out one thing, and that is discarding cards. Discarding cards is a very awkward thing for new players, I think, because again, there's no card cost. So there's not really a reason why you can't ever play a card, except for some very few exceptions. But that doesn't mean every card is good when you're going to play it. And there are some very situational cards, especially something like a board clear, that might be worth holding on to, might be worth playing on the turn, might be worth just removing from your hand so that you're drawing more cards at the end of your turn. That kind of stuff is going to take a while to learn, one, what your deck wants to do and what other tools it has that sort of mimic the same one. So if you really need to hold it, or if you're okay discarding it because you're going to get other things that do the same effect later. But to do a discard on your turn, again, it's still based on your house, just like playing and using cards. So if I choose Brobnar here, I can choose to discard this Grunt Buggy because maybe my opponent has a lot more bigger creatures than me, and that's actually going to be harmful to me in the long run. So instead of playing it, I'm going to discard it. Again, as a new player, that can be very counterintuitive, but you always have to think about that at the end of your turn, you're drawing back up to a full hand size. So the more cards you get rid of from your hand on any given turn, the more you're going to see for next turn, and the more you're going to be able to set up for larger turns, especially if you have combos or things like that. So just something to keep in mind there. Again, learning how and when to discard is going to take a little bit more time. Don't be afraid of it though, because cycling your deck, getting to kind of see more cards in general, is usually not a bad choice. All right, so let's take a look really quick at substeps 2 and 3. Substep 2 is, again, the after you choose a house effects, and these are compared to especially the start of turn effects and forge a key effects. They are a lot rarer and usually not super impactful. And then substep 3, we're looking at taking your archives. So we're going to look at what archives are and kind of mechanically how they work. And to look at both of those, we're going to cheat and use one artifact. That is memory chip. So memory chip is a Logos artifact that says, after you choose Logos as the active house for the turn, archive a card. Again, substep 2, after I've chosen one of my 3 houses, if I choose Logos, not if I choose one of the other 2, if I choose Logos, this activates passively, sort of like our start of turn effects, and I get to do the action, which is archiving a card. Let's take a look at archives quick. Archiving is essentially a storage area for cards. It's a very strong mechanic, especially for setting up things like combos or just really big bursty turns, or for saving answers to stuff your opponent has. But essentially, it's a way to, instead of discarding, which we talked about in the first example, if it's a card that you want out of your hand so that you get to draw more, but you definitely know you're going to need later, archiving is the way to go, because what you're going to do is you're going to take a card. So say I called Logos. I'm going to take this Exile from my hand and I'm going to place it face down, kind of in an out of play area. Some people will put it on their Archon card. Some people will put it over to the right side over here. As long as it is clearly indicated that that is your archives, it's fine. Your opponent is not allowed to look at those cards. And essentially, those cards stay there until in substep 3, at some point in the game, you say, I am taking my archives. Once you do that, what is important is you have to take everything that is in there. You can't just select 1 or 2 cards from your archives to take. So it's possible in some games that you actually have maybe 6 whole cards archived in there. You have a whole nother hand of 6 cards. Now at the start of my turn, maybe I decide to go Saurian and I want to use some of the cards in my archives. Not all the cards in my archives are Saurian, but regardless, in substep 3, when I choose to take my archives, I have to take the whole thing. This is good and bad. It means I'm going to have a really big Saurian turn, but it also means if I have a lot of other cards from other houses in there, probably not going to get to draw anything more until the turn after, because I'm going to have more than 6 cards at the end of my turn. Again, it's can be bad in some ways if you have what we call a muddy archives, which has a lot of different houses in there, but sometimes it's worth the payoff when you get to have really big combo turns from some of the stuff that you've archived. It only happens from effects like this. You can't just choose to archive whenever you want. And again, it's always from hand that you're archiving something unless a card says otherwise. Pretty straightforward mechanically, this entire step, but you can see there's a lot of big implications, both of what house you choose and what you're doing with your archives. There you have it. That's your choose a house step. Again, very simple mechanically, but this is essentially where you're doing the entire planning for your turn. So there's a lot of things to think through. As a new player, again, I really just recommend you try and play a lot of cards, see what things do, and really just get that experiential knowledge before you try to get the perfect strategy every turn, because there's always going to be even random elements in the game, things like Wild Wormhole, where you can't account for what that's going to do 100% on your turn. So you might as well just sling it out there and see what happens and start learning from the bumps and bruises, but also the successes that are going to come from that. Next episode, we are finally getting into playing using all the good stuff of actually taking a turn in Keyforge and playing the game. So really excited for that. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.